into the computer so that we can see them. Mrs. Patrycja Grzyś is going to start with the presentation Key Cultural Producers in the Contemporary City, the case study of Gdansk. All of you who feel like having a coffee, key culture producers in the contemporary city, the case study of Gdansk. Here you go. Thank you. Let me, basically I will stand because I'm not, well, I'm not too high, so I'm not too tall, so you will see me. Welcome to you and thank you for having me. It's so important for me to be here. I was in a lucky position to participate in some of the events and projects organized under the auspices of the city of Wrocław, and I am so happy to be here at the end, and I congratulate and I wish you all the success in the future. And I would like to dwell a little bit on the producers, on the culture creators in the contemporary city, and I will use the example of the city of Gdańsk because my name is Patrycja Grzyś and I am a doctoral student of the Institute of Geography at the Faculty of Oceanography, or whatever, the science of oceans and geography at Gdańsk University. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, because the lady has some problem, it seems, but okay. Let me continue without the presentation, unfortunately. So I think a very important thing to mention before I start talking about specific examples is to explain my techniques. I don't doubt that you know them, of course, but it seems that it is important to do it for the reason that we are now living in times where the precision of delineating the meaning of different terms is very important to avoid misunderstandings, and that's why I will provide you with some exclusions when defining the culture in the future, because this is what I'm going to talk about. Sorry, let us go back to the second slide then, thank you. Now, as I said, many terms contemporarily can be explained in a very simple way, which is that you say the given term can stand for nothing or for anything, or it is a wide term, and that's the same applies to culture. And a very similar definition is used by the city of Gdańsk on culture, which can be read in the reports created by under the auspices of Artur Domański in the city cultural policies. Gdańsk uses a wider definition than that suggested by Wrocław. They say that culture can happen anywhere at any time. This is true, I agree with that, but what I'm going to talk about today is not only culture, institutionalized culture, but also, or mainly, that's the culture that escapes, goes beyond the institution borders and goes beyond any legal framework and grows from the bottom. It's not the culture with capitalized culture, it's not the culture of refined persons who spend their time in a refined way at refined locations. And since it is also not the traditional Gdańsk culture, it's the culture in the city of Gdańsk. Because the closest existing definition of a culture in the city for me is the definition of a culture which says that it is a social product of common creation of people, and this is what I want to focus myself on. So, who is the creator? The one mentioned in my caption, in the caption of the presentation, and in the definition, that's a person which is not exclusively a producer of the cultural policy in the city. He is not associated with a specific social group. It can be anybody, from the youngest persons up to the oldest ones. And it's not only the elite which is normally mentioned. This is any person who gets involved into the creation and works for the benefit of our cities to make them cultural space and more attractive. Why are we talking about the city culture at all in this particular way that we have not mentioned before in this way? We know that our cities are very dynamic. They change often. They are changing all the time. This is unavoidable. And within the cities, the culture is also changing. And something that we have already mentioned today during our discussions in the previous presentation was the widening of the space of the fields of culture. The contemporary context is changing. The contemporary context not only of the city of Gdańsk, but also of all the cities. And in this context, a fantastic report was created, and I encourage you to get acquainted with the widening of the culture field and the diagnosis of the cultural potential of the city of Gdańsk. And the editor of the report distinguished specific dimensions to widen the space of culture. They have been defined during the previous presentations, sometimes clearly, sometimes not so clearly. So that's about widening the space of culture in terms of the activities used for it. But I want to focus my presentation on the sectoral widening of the fields of culture. I want to discuss the emergence of new actors, the emergence of new formulas for those actors to operate, how the actors operate. It's not really the division that I would like to present, the division of the actors in specific tables. I don't want to divide them into groups because I think that's the most important thing, the most important issue, the most important relation that should be between them is the cooperation. That's why I am presenting them in the form of a circle, and I want to discuss briefly every of those traditional ones and those less traditional ones. Local politicians first. I don't want to focus on them too long because the theme of local culture policy can be found in the existing reports. I just want to briefly draw your attention to two elements, to the person of the manager, of the mayor of the city, who is very important in terms of the culture production, and also Magdalena Kubacka has forwarded a very interesting typology of mayors of Polish cities, and there are three types according to her. The creator, who introduces changes. We have some of them, not many, just a few of them have remained. I'm not sure whether this is good or not. Another mayor type is a passive ignorant, and you can find somebody like this in smaller cities. And the third type, mentioned by Kubacka, is a manager who listens to the people, who listens actively, and who cooperates with the population. And that's the most reasonable one, the wise one, but unfortunately not the most frequent one that emerges. However, I have the impression, and I want to strongly believe that this type of manager, the type of manager, is the one that we have in the city of Gdańsk. Another element is the fact that we often forget that local politicians, truly speaking, emerge from our local backyard. And there is the trend, a very positive trend that I am noticing in Gdańsk nowadays, that persons who have been involved socially, they start getting involved politically to have more impact. to have more power and to have more decisive power also in the culture. And they are becoming a more formal producer of culture. The institutions of culture, that's the dominant type of subjects, of institutions, let's say, the most stable, just because of stable funding. And the scale of their activity is widening. That's the most important conclusion. Within their activity, they go not only they beyond the hitherto framework. I mean, buildings, authorities, offices, and functionalities as such, but they are the ones that are mostly replaced. Their functions are mostly replaced by other facilities and institutions. I will explain it later. And what is quite important, and is mentioned in Gdansk, we don't have a strong university center that would create the culture, and that's one of the shortfalls of our cultural sector in Gdansk. Although in June 2017 there emerged a new facility that, as I hope, will change this status. And in this context, I should not avoid the Institute of City Culture, which, according to my opinion, is the most important, the leading cultural facility in Gdansk. They create fantastic things. They get people involved. They get persons involved who are associated with culture and outside of the culture. They always try to get you and to educate you, which is very important. The NGOs that are on the increase in terms of their influence, they are replacing the traditional institutions of culture, although they are not so stable compared with the institutions of culture. There is a lot of competition between them, and unfortunately they do not cooperate, and this is one of the elements that is mentioned in the reports as one of the problems. I have mentioned the non-integrated organizational network. They have lots of actors with different objectives, with different professions, with at different ages. So they would have to agree and to get rid of the problem of non-cooperation. This is a problem for the institutions. They are also an intermediary and mediator between the population and the authorities. In Gdańsk there is a lot of important foundations, associations, which are a strong force for the benefit of Gdańsk culture. Companies. This is not so self-evident as a cultural producer. Small local cafes, galleries, who have always been the heart of culture, but also big businesses, which not evidently are a culture producer. They might become one because they perceive the local culture as a factor improving their competitiveness. One example, Olivia Business Center versus University of Gdańsk. And the University of Gdańsk is an anti-example how not to create city culture. Because although this complex of buildings next to opposite the university is an open complex which encourages to enter, and paradoxically it is easier to organize a cultural event there. At the university has more barriers, more guards, which is not an incentive to create culture. There are also some private, informal persons or associations, artists, which is also a very important subject of culture in Gdańsk, and the inhabitants. Here I want to stop briefly. When I read in reports, in articles, that the inhabitants are just at the very end of the list of culture creators, and then when I consider when I meditate the city culture, then I just start thinking, what is wrong with it? Because the inhabitants are the traditional, but also the new creator, the most important creator of culture in the city. Creating culture. In Gdansk, this can be done by the selection of their representatives. It can be done by participating in events, not only passively but also actively. And the Institute of City Culture can help here, but also the participation in numerous debates, meetings, and the widely perceived participation. I know that's the end, but that's the very last slide. Okay, well, that's the end. Well, that's the summary. Thank you for the possibility of talking to you. And once again, I want just to remind you that this change, this transformation has a temporary character. So we should not be using a new dichotomy. We shouldn't replace these terms old and new, and I'm not so convinced that there is a new dichotomy emerging. I just want to mention briefly new actors, new types of relations, and also we need to mention the widening of this field of culture, but I don't want to elaborate. I just want to briefly mention that there will be a very important cultural event in a few days in Gdańsk. I invite you very cordially to it, and there you might get some more knowledge about the culture in the city of Gdańsk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Martyna Ciszewska, vacated urban areas and activation of the resident new spaces of culture and art in the city. The floor is yours. I'm Martyna Ciszewska, and I've already been announced and introduced since the presentation. I write a doctoral thesis with the Warsaw University of Life Sciences. I started this topic last year, and wasteland, urban wasteland or vacant spaces, this is something which I find exciting, and how to use them, how to utilize them in the best interest of residents. In year 2014, as part of the Futuwawa 2014, it was a competition, the competition held in Warsaw, and with a purpose to invite and share various vision for Warsaw development, even most utopias, the greatest utopias, to see how Warsaw could go forward, and being guided by the brief I proposed biennial of vacant spaces. I wanted to use the form of a festival that becomes a driver in an urban environment, and which form activates the city. So biennial versus wasteland, versus vacant spaces. Sometimes there are gaps in urban space because of the development, inconsistent development, and there are so many of such spaces. We can define them in different ways, as well as urban wasteland. It's like vacant buildings that usually come across. But there are also open spaces, like allotment gardens. Sometimes allotment gardens are just left aside and they become wasteland, waiting for development or pending any projects. How can we use them for the benefit of residents? There are a number of projects that try to face the problem. We can find them in the art area. There is a photographic project. There are these grassroots projects. On many occasions, local communities get together in order to revive the wasteland space. I'm not really about quoting different examples. I'd like to say a couple of words about what happened last year. I'm still hoping to launch Biennial of Wasteland. And I completed a project, taming urban vacant spaces. It was a series of workshops and meetings in very diverse groups in Bydgoszcz, Poznań and Warsaw. 3 cities in Poland, my very personal choices, but then I was able to see the differences between the ways of thinking in the 3 different locations. In each city we held at least 10 meetings with a recruited or selected group of people such as architects and just residents. Some of them also researchers or academics, as we call them. I wanted to combine or see in one place various experiences, various legacies and ways of thinking. It was not only about defining wasteland or vacant space, but also to provide certain direction to the activity in such areas, in urban areas in general, but specifically in such wastelands. Sometimes it's very difficult to identify the owner of the land. Sometimes there are problems, ownership problems, and in terms of tenancies, occupancy, etc. So the workshops were very much experimental. They were like a laboratory exercise, and we could see how the municipality, the city itself, approaches a group working together, and which forms come forward in terms, if we want to revitalize or revive such areas. What was difficult, we never defined the location, the area of our activities, and we were scarce of funds. We actually had nothing in terms of funds. On the other hand, in order to ensure that the members of workshops could attract more residents, in order for them to be able to learn how to arrange for a joint effort, I'd like to quote a couple of examples. In Bydgoszcz, we opened a vacant building, or reopened a vacant building. The building had been for a while vacated and occupied, but it used to be a very vivid and attractive place. It was the so-called modern bookshop. We reopened the place just for one weekend. It's in one of the high streets in the city, and the success was immense. What they could see on the walls, exhibited on the walls, the members showed various interpretations of wasteland in Bydgoszcz. The very fact that residents could get into this old bookshop There was a gentleman who had worked there for 40 years, and lots of people who would come there with their parents to buy books. So the place itself, this location, had its own legacy, and we didn't want to impose anything. Therefore, we could show art. There was no barrier. We called it a gallery, but there was no barrier of a gallery, unlike other galleries that operated elsewhere, and lots of residents would not step in, would find it not a place to visit. So inside we had various installations, and that was about Bydgoszcz. In Poznań, the wasteland approach to wasteland and vacant spaces was very different. Our activity developed around an old swimming pool area. There were various games with residents, and there were various events, and thanks to that, lots of residents could see that there is a swimming pool in the park. In Warsaw, following this route, we opened a gallery of use, if we can say that. We operated the gallery for 1 month. We wanted to open one of the vacant units in order to show both our achievement, but also turn it into some sort of dynamic space. We opened it as an exhibition. We had an opening night, but we were also encouraging local people, we were encouraging people living next door to get involved, to change the gallery or to contribute to its existence. In addition to what happened over that month, 1 month of December, the agenda, the program of the place was in the making. Local residents would turn up because they had taken lots of vacant building or urban wasteland pictures. It was all in Tamka Street. It's pretty central with many vacant buildings. And last year we raised this point, the point of using such spaces for cultural activities. Our gallery was turned into an artistic shop or workshop. The city has embarked on various projects in order to open such spaces to residents. And this state of utility or state of use was created in Bydgoszcz, welcoming both residents and other urban partners, galleries, gallery owners, the city itself, and Moderator Inwestycje. This is a large brand in Bydgoszcz. They are in the business of buying out vacant buildings and converting them into offices. They've changed as a result of working together with us. They've changed their concept. It's all in terms of using vacant buildings. In many streets in Bydgoszcz, what we can see, they're simply dead streets. I mean, in terms of, you can see this banner for rent. Or when you leave the railway station in Bydgoszcz and you head towards the old market square, every second building would be for rent or for lease. Through such activities, we can bring them back to life, these properties, and probably contribute or make the cultural life in Bydgoszcz more open. And what happened last year, or has been happening since last year, now we have certain center foundation in terms of knowledge. We've identified sources or potential, and maybe we could simply run it further, make a step further, and end up in an ambitious project of biennial of wastelands. A great, shall we say, drift of optimism. And now over to Kamila Dolińska. I believe this is the second part concerning the microgrant for European Capital of Culture, which methods to use in order to encourage people to work together.
Hello again. Let me explain the term of social participation, because I will be talking about the participation in culture. Marek Krajewski writes, cultural participation is not an independent activity. It is one of the forms of social participation takes on. So that's a general term, but I'm going to talk about one of the forms of participation in culture. I mean, I'm going to talk about participation in culture. That's the subject. Right, it's okay now. The starting point for my reflections about the participation of Wrocław inhabitants in culture is the diagnosis of the problems in this scope, which is included in the application of Wrocław for the title of the European Capital of Culture. And there is written that Wrocław inhabitants are excluded from the city space, from the cultural space, and they are passive in terms of being in the culture. The creators of the application wrote that the active participation in culture is one of the methods of including the excluded groups into the common world, and we want to suggest permanent solutions for the participation in culture. And the program of microgrants, according to our opinion as researchers into this form of participation, is really a very good tool to activate and to include the inhabitants, and that's why it was emerged to enable Wrocław inhabitants to co-create the program of the European Capital of Culture. In the literature you can find three streams of research on cultural participation. These are on the public, on the reception of culture, and what really is interesting to me is the focus on the description and analysis of cultural participation expressed by differentiated patterns of participation in culture, what Natalia Niedźwiecka mentioned already, a very wide method of defining culture and cultural activities. That's why the participation in culture, cultural participation, is seen by us as a process and not an event. This participation is connected with the changing role of culture. The culture has a changed meaning field. It's not like I will participate only once, but this is also my conscientious act of selection. I know where I am, and why I participate here, and what benefits I can draw from my being in culture. And this applies to dynamic patterns of participation which are strongly connected with the technical and technological developments. In the same way, culture is defined, the culture is defined in a wide and narrow sense, and the same can apply to the term of participation in culture. There is the perception, consumption of culture created by others, but also there is the wide term, which is the active inclusion process, exclusion process of persons and groups into specific situations which are regulates it within the culture. And that's here is a very interesting portion which expresses the wide definition of the cultural participation. This is the inclusion of everybody into the stream of culture to draw benefits and the riches of culture, but also to contribute, but by their own cultural contributions. And we have mentioned this several times already today. It's about being in the living culture, inclusive culture, close to the creator on the daily basis. And it's about being in the culture that will have a social impact in terms of creating bonds, which on one part directs you towards common activities and bonds that can emerge when participating in a specific cultural activity. Within the program of microgrants, I'm talking about the regulations, everybody could implement their own idea for an activity, because the assumption was that Wrocław people have a potential that needs to be supported, and microgrants delivered this. They gave the people the support in form of funds, but also organization. And this wide definition of culture in the application that was mentioned by my colleague gave us a very wide range of possibilities. I want to mention some criteria that could support the participation. That was about the theme and the motivation for the activity, the involvement of the inhabitants of the city of Wrocław, the own contribution of the applicant, the reasonable cost, the adaptation of the means to the recipients, innovation and the potential of the given solution. And another criterion that was taken into account was additional points were given to activities that could be implemented outside of the old city in order to activate locations which are a little bit dormant, let's call it. Who could be the applicants? They could be natural persons, informal groups of natural persons, foundations, associations, churches, confessions, cooperatives, social cooperatives. So these are the data from the applications in the 3 sessions. What can you see based on this analysis? From session to session, the number of applications was smaller and smaller. The coordinating team inclined to explain it by the fact that the promotional activity was wider in the very beginning of the program, and then with time it was getting weaker. There was a boom in the very beginning that was in January and February, and at the end of the year 2015, the seasonality of participation in culture, our conclusion was that applications from February could be implemented, should be implemented before the holiday time and not in the dead period where a part of the inhabitants of Wrocław are outside of the city. And another reflection of ours was that the number of applications of natural persons was going down. And the argument to explain it was that among certain applicants, there emerged the conviction that microgrants were given to the same persons, the persons who were associated with NGOs, who know how to do it, how to submit applications. But this was monitored to a reasonable extent throughout the whole competition procedure. When we should talk about inciting participation, I want to focus on the social potential, which within the program, came to be seen. And if we take into account 4 aspects, the analysis of the social potential, the resources and the skills of the people, the networks of relations between the people, the leadership and the support for such an involvement of the members of the local community to act for the benefit of the community, we can be fully convinced to say that the elements of the social potential were visible, became visible in the microgrants. I just want to focus on the potential that we discovered by 2 categories of people who assessed the microgrants. I just want to focus on the jury and on the microgrants team. What did the jurors say in the applications, firstly, in the applications that they read, they were 400 in total, 15 jury members. Well, the applications said that Wrocław inhabitants had the feeling of being creative, of being the creators, and this we discovered analyzing the applications. You could feel it. These were not always people connected or associated with NGOs, so they perceive themselves as creators. Secondly, they want to do something for the others outside of the city center, because the city center is a lively spot, there's a lot of events, but outside of the city, not much is going on. And I quote here, the decentralization and the possibility of hearing the voice of the people outside of the center shows that they want that something is going on there in their neighborhood, and this is good. And it's good that something is going on there outside of the city. What else? There emerged the conclusion that the people have the competences and the skills that they want to share with the others. They are motivated to act, and I quote again, it's nice when somebody doesn't get the microgrant for the first time, they try again. And this is really, this testifies to the determination that they want to do something nice for the others. And we need to add that before applying, all the applicants could consult the team, the microgrant team, how to describe the application, the activity, how to fill in the application, so that it gets as close as possible to a template, to the model of filling in the applications, because not everybody, we know that, not everybody had ever submitted such application in their lifetime. And people came to talk to us, those who had not had any experience in this scope. Also, the citizenship competition emerged. People would say, if my neighbor did something, we could do it also. If somebody did something in the other neighborhood, why not do it here? So, and another thing is about the activation of the bottom-up approach. I didn't read the applications, but I was I mean, this is a quotation. I need to revise my perception of the inhabitants of Wrocław. When you approach this city, it's not like a location of some memory. This is a living spot. This is filled with people who want to do something. What did the microgrant team say about this potential, this social potential? The categories here were similar. They mentioned the sensitivity. It ranks third. It has two aspects. On the one side, this is for the benefits of those excluded seniors, children, there was a very strong tendency on the other side of remembrance. We should revive the history of the city. We should keep the history, because there are people among us who have gone through something very interesting and they are departing. And also the potential of creativity, I quote again. We wouldn't have had come up with the idea, we as the team, that we would destroy the flood dam, so that we would organize a game festival. So this offer that we may come up with as the animator of culture, the animator of local society, a lot of surprising projects were added based on the passion and the knowledge of the people. That was something. This was a festival, really. What they would organize, common meetings, coming to get together. The jurors found some of them really very exceptional. And two other aspects of this potential is that people operate in networks, and they can get other people involved. And they are also partners for the institutions, because from the bottom they are able to show certain gaps and certain areas that you should take care of in terms of the cultural activity. And the last slide relates to the overall assessment by our microgrant team. This is not only optimistic. This optimistic approach is expressed in many interviews. It was, well, I mean, the project was able to entice people to act. This is very positive. So we encourage people to act. The number of projects testifies to it. The projects have been submitted within the 3 sessions this year. The program is there. People want to participate in the program. But what is also important, one of the coordinators drew attention to it, we led to the success of a man. I mean, people without any previous experience had to perform the project from A to Z. They would have to discover the potential. There was an academy of microgrant applicants created. People would share their experiences. And also this program was anchored in the local community, which was very difficult because that was the year of Wrocław as the European capital of culture. That was really difficult. So getting people involved into this program was connected with the fact that this program was promoted just along the promotion of the other important big events. What we didn't do, we didn't really support in the same way all the participants of the project. Some inexperienced ones had to be given a lot more support, and our team was only 3 persons, so we had a lot of work. We also anchored this idea of participation. So the assumption was that projects should be inclusive. If volunteers were to be selected, they would have to be selected from among the people, and so that the activity was as open as possible. And the problems that we had consisted in the fact that we had a list of volunteers, and during the negotiations that were an element of the program, we were trying to direct the potential performers of the program. We wanted to encourage them to open up for the inhabitants. We stressed that it was not a full set of people acting, and those who you acted for. Also, another aspect was a successful promotion of projects, but on the other hand, the microgrant applicants didn't have sufficient experience when promoting their own projects. Just to round up, the project proved successful. Whoever you ask whether to continue the project or not, the absolute majority would say the project should be continued, not without any changes, of course. They have been implemented this year, but the approval of the jury, the microgrant team, the participants and the applicants, because we talked also to the participants of the projects, all of them said, yes, you should continue the project, because this gives you a chance to create a space which is very friendly for social activities. Thank you very much indeed. Kamila Biskupska. That's the project about Wrocław and the social memory, a discursive picture of the city in a Wrocław project. I remember that.
A warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope it is working. Well, again, a warm welcome. I want to show you, perhaps I can bite on it and show you like this. I'm short of one hand. Well, the title, you've already heard the title. Well, I can manage, I think I can cope. I'd like to mention a modest publication, not a very long one, but very exciting. And I'm a sociologist, and I am in the business of social memory, collective memory. And you can buy it in Tajne Komplety, the name of the bookshop. It's not at a very competitive price, really pennies or groschen involved. It is a good read for anyone who is linked with Wrocław. It was published because of the European Capital of Culture, and it covers more than 600 notes or communications of 214 people. So each participant could contribute with 3 narratives. The organizers were very excited about it. Finally, the book includes or gave chance to 214 individuals, and for me as a sociologist, it's very precious. It's an excellent example of what sociologists have already said about Wrocław. Now, who responded to this competition? And a certain disadvantage for me as a researcher is that fact that the group of respondents is not well characterized or described. Most probably, I found out were people born in the 1950s and 1970s, as well as the incomers, immigrants, mainly students. Now, the people who were born in Wrocław in 1950s or 70s are really very well anchored in their childhood. The incomers concentrate on the back to their university days or college days. So I'll be focusing on their memories, remembrance of things. From the sort of researcher point of view, I wouldn't be able to send my work to anyone for an academic review. This material is not scientific, but it's an exciting stock to be used or utilized for further research from thinking about further studies. The authors or the editors of this book picked up the most exciting, the most interesting, at their discretion, contributions. This is a pretty concise and pretty integrated set of various contributions and submissions. Is it cohesive because the editors picked up certain contributions and selected them on purpose, or because the line of people think along the same line? So anything that we find in this book is pretty cohesive. People who enrolled for the project were briefed to start their brief memoir, with the phrase, "I can remember that." And what we find out, this individual personal trait, it was somehow converts into the social memory. And I am getting even more exciting. I'm so anxious to see this, because sociologists have not even touched upon it. As I said, I'm in the business of social memory, and in the perspective of social memories is the macro perspective and national identity. If we are talking now, if we are dealing with the memories in places or locations, we usually deal with the national heritage, such as monuments, plaques, anything in memoriam, any sort of memorials. What I want to say, this small and modest work proves that we may need more studies and more research, and you may want to think that most of people don't live on memorials. Now, the last thing is lieu de mémoire, Sapir Honora, the memory of places in Europe and in America. And the very last aspect, something the uncharted land for sociologists, the autobiographical memory is the short-term memory. It's sensoric memory. I think that, well, certain senses dominate over another senses in culture. We are in visual culture. And this aspect, the aspect of vision, is highlighted over the various memories in the book. Can I show you? I'm going to show you two slides. The classical places remembered, where we as researchers focus, because we are not getting on the macro level. I'm not sure whether the editors, because there is no macro level. I'm not sure whether it was intentional. People remember, for example, transporting the statue of Chopin to the South Park, or we were laying flowers and wreaths in Kościuszki Square because there was a stone, a big rock there, a memorial, some sort of memorial. This is many occasions in various studies, collective memories highlighted. And Fredro, the statue of Fredro, playwright, Polish 19th century playwright, and the dark blue color of butcher's shop. I'm not quite sure, can you see the various submissions, and I don't want to take too much of the time by reading. If you are interested, you can get this book, and the book is very exciting, and I believe each city should launch a publication. Well, this is the remembrance of places. We go away from certain memorials important for the sort of national memory. We go back to the individual. What's important for the life of Wrocław residents is the tramway. Tramway is mentioned by each resident, each contributor. It didn't matter whether there were people born in 1950s or 1970s or those who came to study in Wrocław. There was always a reference to the tramway service. We have this very poetic line about tramways. I'm not sure is it a tribute to the editor, but these descriptions, these contributions are very nice, actually very beautiful, good read. The last person, the number of contributor, in the book we have full names of the contributors. Well, I'm using their numbers, and somebody says that tramways were different, the cars were different, there were platforms, you can touch this element or that element, and this is about learning the city, that people were going from one depot to the other depot, from depot the full line, or there is a girl with a memory of her grandmother taking her for a ride on a tram in order to show her the city. So the tramway was some sort of tool in order to know the city. And there we go. We have a ticket inspector with the sort of peeled off nail vanish. Tramway being a very important part of Wrocław life. Somebody met their life or girlfriend, and this is my personal memory. And there were wobbly tracks, and it was very difficult to stay, to keep the equilibrium, to keep in balance. So you had to actually bend your knees. And the next thing, the market square, rynek. You read things in sociological literature that the rynek, that Wrocław people are proud of rynek, that rynek is the actual synonym of Wrocław. It had no reflection in that book at all. There was something about tramways in the past, that they stopped tramways, and that you could have a fight. If you were a skinhead, you had a fight in the market square. Next thing, the next plot, the cinema. You had to wait for the box office lady. Box office person had a hypertension, and there was a furnace, an oven in the cinema because it was cold, and then they put in coal. Next thing, I never mentioned that, the understanding of the phrase, I can remember that. Their choice was, I can remember something that belongs to the past, that's non-existent. Therefore, the tramways in the market square, maybe this plot was somehow abandoned, and obviously the love story, and obviously the railway station cinema, and the railway station itself, the gate of the city. You open the doors or you close the gates when you are leaving, departing the city. So this is the role of the railways. The sensory memory is in a way associated with eating. People have lots of memories about eating. Ice cream in Komandorska Street, and the wafer rolls with whipped cream. So pastry with whipped cream. I think it was your mem. I won't say more. So ice cream in Komandorska Street, and pastry with whipped cream in Grunwaldzki. Food is important, and childhood. The example of the cinema, going back to the cinema, cracking or creaking a chair, and the smell of the whole cinema theater, and the aspect of eating and food. You shared food. You would roast chestnut in the park. Students would visit or frequent a shop, 24-hour shop in Szczytnicka or something. After a night of drinking, you would go somewhere to a shop to get some food. Ice cream, toasts, and very little about smells, odors. I don't think this probably calls for yet one more survey. It's very difficult to make senses discursive, converting. People have few memories of good smell. Somebody could remember this bread, the fragrance of bread or clothing. Some time ago, I wrote an article about socialism, people who were 19 or 18 in 1989, and the fact that people had memories of 1970s and 80s as grey era, and we could go deeper with our research. Very little sounds like squeaking rats under the floor of tramways in 1940s and 1950s. Those were incomers, those were immigrants, or creaking stairs. Just to recap, just want to highlight what I've already said. The projects like this one demonstrate the need that autobiographic plot or aspect is somehow desired, that there is a motosensoric memory, short-term memory, and it's still social memory. And the whole problem of extending the memory of places, the remembrance of places, not necessarily the national memory, and certain elements related to human senses, human body. We have a little reflection of that. Thank you very much for your attention. Well, thank you very much, and sorry for sort of disciplining you. I know that so many people are excited about the city's past and the memory, the remembrance of things in the city. Pytanie lub komentarz.
My father-in-law and his they are from Wrocław, born Breslauer, and I'm from Berlin. And my husband is Polish, so he's born here in Breslau, grew up in Stuttgart, we met in Berlin and came back. So the thing what I loved as a socialist is that I had Jadek. For the last 15 years, I could listen to him, what he went through as a citizen of this city, and he showed me so many things what you talked about, the smelling, the things. My father-in-law about Renoma on the Dacho as they were students, how they climbed up of the Dacho to meet the girls over there. And this is exactly what we do in Berlin. We are inviting our elderly people into schools and making spotykamshes with the kids because they are getting older. And one day they will be not there anymore. And the remindings, or was heißt es, remindings? Erinnerung?
Memories?
Wspomnienia. They are so ważne for our cities. And it is so cool to hear that you have that kind of book. It's just, thank you. Because I love to work with elder people and listen to them. Also in schools, in kindergartens. We started that in Berlin in 1989, after the Berlin Mur was broke down, because of you all. Thank you for that again. And it was successful. Maybe we could do it here as well, in Wrocław, with schools, universities. Is it possible? So, yes.
Okay. This topic in my presentation because Breslau and history of Wrocław is it is very difficult theme, and it's really difficult.
Even in Polish, I would find it rather challenging because it's a very difficult theme. There is a lot to be done ahead of us in terms of Wrocławia, Wrocław. In the public discourse, I mean, other sociologists will know the German plot, the German theme has been somehow overshadowed by multiculturalism. It's non-existent, but it is there. It is there and it's not there. culture. Not everyone would say, I mean, people like to think about this multiculti city, but it's not true. It's even making it more difficult to relate to the city. You can see it with 600 memories. There is a couple of things, only a couple of things that people mention Breslau at all. People from Opole were trying to find refuge in Breslau because of the flood. And there is another theme where I could concentrate on that. Thank you very much for raising this point, though.
Yep. Jana? Okay, please.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Jana Stoklasa. I'm from Leibniz University in Hanover, and we make research on creating somehow European identity with the help of cultural heritage. So Wrocław is also our research subject, and I think your book is kind of helping to overcome this mystery that is still surrounding the city concerning the exchange of the population. So a little bit you answered already my question. There was just one memory mentioning Breslau. Is there any other negative aspects mentioned, or was your approach very questioning positive aspects?
It's not my book. It's the first thing.
Okay.
I didn't write it. And it's edited by Karol Pęcherz and Jacek Bierut. And it's quite positive book. And once I remember once mentioned was smell of Wrocław. That is not nice. And it was once, and this Breslau, I don't know if it was in negative way mentioned. So, but it was mentioned. I don't know. I really don't know. I can't say. But I think it's quite positive book. I don't know if it's because of authors who have chosen positive memories, or it's just the memory of the city that is positive.
And one more question: will you publish, or your team, it also in English, maybe?
I started to publish in English, yes, about this book, yes.
Thank you.
No. But I started to cooperate with people from Germany about very important adjective in Polish. Yes, post-German, and we have no research. Post-German, it is important in our identity, I think, in Wrocław and other north and west territories of Poland. But there are no research about this adjective and thinking about post-Germanity, we can say. Okay.
So, any other comments, questions? Yes, perfect.
Monika Murzyn of Kraków. I want to say that your analysis of the research is very interesting indeed. I think we could relate to the publications in many other cities, like the research of Professor Mikulski-Pomorski in Kraków. There is a book about the memory of Kraków inhabitants, Kraków, My Memories, something like this. That was the title, and that was a recording of contributions of memories of the inhabitants of the city. Exactly, that's not this discourse, the official discourse, who decides about which monuments are important, what to do with the buildings and so on. But what is meant here is the grassroots opinions. That was a very interesting picture, and you could analyze it. Although there is also always the filtering process in the book of Professor. There was some ideological filtering to be seen, who responded to to the announcement in the newspaper to contribute to voice the opinion on the city. So you can compare, well, this material between Wrocław and Kraków. I can comment that it was really very interesting. I don't know whether it could be confirmed in the case of other cities. Jarosław Dziaj, the Faculty of Geography, the apotheosis of the city character, what is the most important thing in the city, the railway, tramways and theaters. If you ask nowadays the people what is the most important, I don't know whether the answer would be the same, because these institutions are globalized, they are very up-to-date, very modern. So now I don't know what the response would be. What does it mean to be an inhabitant of the city? It is quite interesting to see how this memory is changing. We remember the city as it was. So it's very interesting. Maybe I will use it in my course on social geography.
I would like to comment a little bit critically also on your lecture concerning Gdansk. I was liking the important group of scientists that are also key producers in culture. I think especially in Gdansk, isn't it there that we had the big discussion about the Second World War Museum? I think that's a very good example.
I thought about the weak position of universities as institution, but of course there's a lot of individuals like scientists who are really, really important, but I put them rather in the individuals than in group of university institutions. So that may be the thing that was misunderstood.
Tomek Kasprzak, City Laboratory, I think. My question is, when I was listening to these receipts, to these stories, this was like a log of memory of the Jewish inhabitants of the city. The polysensuality question, it's very much represented, but these were the social spaces. But how about the private memory spaces, individual memory, intimate memory spaces, and the microgrants? Now, what is the perspective of the team? What was the weak and the strong points from the point of view of the persons executing the program? Thank you for this advice. I think advice like this. Thank you for mentioning the book by the professor. And well, the fact that somebody has a memory of a coffee shop and he loved to go there, and that in the ruins of the market square there was an ice cream booth. This is individual. When you collect it, it turns out that this is a quite often repeated trait, like the memory that the floorboards were polished and the smell of it was very strong, and you remember the smell, the scent. I mean, all the people had their private memories, really, but it turned out it was strongly social. I don't know to what extent the editors would clip away some strange things. I don't know the process of editing. I only can see the final result of this. It would be quite interesting to see negative opinions that the editors decided not to publish. I would have to interview them and talk to them just about the editing process, what directions they followed. Now, the executors of the program. I have a problem with this because I prepared myself to talk about the jurors and the migrants. Maybe Natalia will help me because she analyzed the applications within the applications that were implemented. So far as I remember, much more comments came from people who didn't get the funds. They came up with the arguments that would be NGOs, institutions, they would argue that it would be easy to foresee who would get the money. But that was not the case, and I'm fully convinced of it. I was the juror, I sat on the jury for the next session, for the follow-up session, and we were really very, very careful to distribute the money equally to the people who had not before executed any program. And there was a questionnaire to tell us whether this was the first grassroots project or not. So we tried to control this. Although when talking to different persons in different personal relations, it's really difficult to fully eliminate persons who are networked, who somehow are institutionalized. When talking about NGOs, for example. But when talking about negative aspects, the executors paid attention to, there was the question of the amount of the funds, but it was seldom, just 3 times out of 30. I would have to check. There was a very limited number of critical opinions. Generally, this was an apotheosis. There was a very positive talk about the networks and so on. So the realizers could communicate and make available the database like somebody was working for the theater, and it was important for him to find people to cooperate. But based on my memory, I think there were maybe 5 critical remarks. There were some aspects relating to the administration itself. I mean, both directions. Either we are not independent, fully not independent, or we are fully independent. So this is really a very... people have different experiences. Well, I would say there were maybe 5 critical remarks, 5 critical opinions.
Okay, so I think it's about time to go for lunch. So before we go, I would like to make just a few organizational comments. Mateusz? Mateusz resigned from asking a question. Thank you, Mateusz. Okay, so first of all, in your silver envelopes, if you haven't looked inside yet, you have 3 vouchers for lunch, 1 voucher for each day, and lunch